Hi all and welcome to the 5th episode of Awakin. It was recorded in a London park thanks to the COVID lockdown of 2020. If you were listening in the future, well done, you survived. If you're listening now in 2020, I hope that this strange pandemic world is treating you okay. Do get in touch and let us know what you think of the episode. We'd love to hear from you. All the best. Jasmine is messaging me.
Yeah, is she coming? I wasn't sure whether...
No, she can't make it.
Okay.
You know what, I'll put her on the blower.
On the what?
The blower. Dog and bone.
Oh, okay. Right.
Sorry, got me right with slack.
Yeah, no, I'm like, what?
Jazz!
Hi, Bill.
Hi, Jazz. Liam here. We're just about to start.
Oh, you're both there?
Yeah, we're in the park! Well, first of all, we have to intro you.
Sure.
So, hi everyone. I'd like to welcome Liam to the show. Liam Chai.
Yeah, Chai.
Yeah. So, let's hear from Liam about himself. Who are you, Liam?
I'm Liam. I turned 27 this year.
Spring chicken.
Yeah, I grew up in Singapore, but about 11 came to London. So I've been in London most of my life now. I guess I never went to university. I feel like since probably like 17, 18, I've been kind of going very off script, so to speak. So maybe we can start from there, I guess.
Yeah, cool. So just some background, like I met Liam through our mutual friend Jasmine, and we hung out before one of the Awakin Circle, no relation to Awakin, events.
Oh yeah.
Here in London, which is actually it's a global thing. Look them up on the website. We'll link to it in the show notes. A really nice thing, I think, where people just hang out at people's homes and meditate together, eat some food, have a chat, and good vibes. So we met just before that, and we spoke for about an hour in a pub, and it was hilarious. We spoke about Vipassana meditation and like the kind of Goenka scene. Let's not call it a cult. And had a really fun chat and a good evening. So I've been dying to get back on ever since. He went to India and he's back in London, and so here we are. Brilliant. Yeah, go on and take it from there. That was a great jumping off point.
Sure.
Singapore, off script.
Yeah, off script, Singapore. Yeah, I mean, I was, when I was like 15, 16, I guess kind of before 16, I was quite typical Asian kid, so to speak. Like I have many cousins and relatives who are doctors, accountants, lawyers, and I just thought, well, I'll be one of those, So I was like, okay, well, doctor sounds cool. So I was kind of prepping to study medicine at uni, and was doing like, shadowing a nurse in a clinic and going to GPs and things. And then I think, I don't remember exactly which book was first, but I started reading quite a few books, and one of them was like, some of these new age spiritual books, so like Eckhart Tolle, and my dad had like a copy of the Tao Te Ching on the bookshelf, and I picked those up, and and I also, because I was getting, like the government at that time, they were giving sixth form students like £30 of EMA money, it was called, a week, to just kind of help with like travel, with textbooks and things like that. And I was I'm still pretty frugal, and I wasn't sure what to spend that money on, and I basically went on, I ended up buying books. So I just started buying all of these like biographies of people, and I think that just kind of gave me inspiration. That
we're in the park, guys. So just for context,
helicopter going past now.
Lockdown London. We're interviewing outdoors in the park just to be safe.
So I just bought these books and I started reading them. So like Malcolm X, Einstein, just I guess kind of like some typical sort of influential people on Earth, and just started reading their biographies, and I think from there it kind of started opening up different worlds for me. Just rabbit holes, I like to say, really, that I've just kind of kept on going down since then. I think it's been a good thing so far.
So when we last spoke, I heard about how Liam had done some pretty extreme meditation stuff, or to me it sounded pretty extreme anyway. So what was your first step in that direction? What were your first experiences with meditation?
So probably my first meditation, I think, was around 16 or maybe 17. It was definitely related to the Eckhart Tolle book that I read, Power of Now. And then, maybe I was just kind of trying it once a week or something like that, really casual. But then around 18, like at that age, a few of my friends were kind of experimenting with psychedelics, and, they had, started exploring that world. And I remember one question that popped up for me was whether the meditative state was the same as these highs that people were experiencing. And that question really was it really kind of stuck with me, I think. And that was kind of when I think I started meditating a bit more, just wanting to kind of see whether that question was answerable. And I think kind of like now in hindsight, it feels really fitting with this whole, especially within like Buddhism, this whole sort of looking with your own direct experience, so it's not like you're trying to find these studies on this question, or you have a question, you're not trying to find studies, trying to find the answers to the question, you're holding this question and you're trying to find a direct experience in your own experience about whether it's true or not. And that really resonated for sure. And then when I was I think 20 or 21, the first retreat I did was the Vipassana Goenka ones. So 10-day silent retreats. And I only went on that because they were basically free. Yeah. So I was like 20, very poor, and I was like, okay, let's try this. This sounds like a good idea.
Yeah.
And that was I'd say it's life-changing. It was a life-changing retreat. I can't even remember whether I went through that when we first met up at the pub. What happened on that retreat? I think I did. No, I think I did.
I think we spoke about it a bit, but let the listeners know.
It's funny, like because there's an invisible third person here that we.
I'm sure they would enjoy a bit of that.
So 10-day retreat. It's like you got like 10 or 11 hours of scheduled meditation on the timetable, and it's silent, but there's like a group of like 120 people. But so the first sort of 6 days were quite, I guess, kind of typical. Like I was trying to meditate, finding it challenging. Lots of aches, pains, lots of thoughts running around, and I guess like the end of the day there was this lecture, and that was kind of the relief in a way. It was like some stimulus at the end of the day. But then around so I actually it was like day 6. I was in the meditation hall. It was just after lunch. So lunch was at like 11:30 a.m. So, and then you have like a 12-hour 12 to 1 is like teachers interviews, and then from 1 p.m. you're back in the hall. And so I remember around 1 p.m. I was back in the hall, and I was doing that that body scan, just kind of scanning the body head to feet, and I remember one phrase in one of the lectures Goenka said. He said, make sure you scan like each and every part of the body, and he kind of emphasized each and every part, and I just remembered being like, oh yeah, each and every part. So that includes my penis, right? Because I'd almost been, because when he does the body scans, he's kind of like head to feet, and he's scanning it initially, and then he goes from like the back or something, and he just jumps to the thighs. He just kind of skips the groin completely. And so when he was like each and every part, and I was like, oh yeah, of course, each and every part. So like you have to scan the penis too, right?
I love that we've got to the dick bit so fast enough.
I guess that's the way to go. yeah, so it just kind of dawned on me, I should probably spend more time there, because I had also kind of been skipping that.
Yeah.
And so I was just kind of spending a little bit extra time scanning around that area. And then as I was scanning, just, I don't really know what happened, but something sort of shifted, and this sort of like bubble of energy just started to kind of grow and just appear. And it was incredibly pleasurable. And like, you know, I wasn't having any sexual thoughts. There was no like porn. There was no, I mean, maybe there were like the women on the other side of the hall, but you know, they were all fully clothed. And there was nothing sort of sexual about the experience. But I was having this incredibly pleasurable energy just start to kind of stem from that scanning, and it basically became like a bubble of orgasm, I would say.
Yeah.
And it kind of started from around my groin area where I was scanning, and then it would just sort of basically start to roll from that groin area to like the lower spine, and then kind of roll up and down the spine basically. And it was just incredibly pleasurable. You know, like I don't know, like probably like 10 times more pleasurable than an ordinary orgasm.
Yeah.
And it lasted like a full hour.
Yeah.
You know, so it's not even like, it doesn't compare to one of these like minute-long orgasms you get from sex. It's just a different level. And so I had that experience on day 6, and it was my first ever retreat, and that was just, I mean, it was intense, but also incredible. And
did you talk to the teachers about it at all?
No. so I'm like 20, and I don't, you know, and there's all these rules in place, right? So there's all these like precepts that you've taken, and and you know, like the genders are segregated, so it just felt like a really sort of sex negative space in a way. And then there was that third precept, which was, you know, abstain from all sexual activity. And so I was experiencing what I was basically calling an orgasm, even though, you know, I didn't have an erection. There was nothing sexual about it except the pleasure. But I just felt, no, I can't bring that to the teacher. Like he's going to say I broke the rules or something. He's going to kick me out. You know, it's just having these kinds of thoughts.
Off ground.
So I never actually spoke to the teachers about it. After the retreat, I basically started to Google it. And that was my first. That was kind of how I started learning about like Taoism, and there's like these whole like Daoist sexual practices. And you know, they had like these sort of diagrams with like the energy flows, like the microcosmic orbit. And I was like, oh, that was it was just following that same path, you know. I was like, wow, there's like this whole thing that's kind of mapped out, several thousand years old, and people have definitely experienced this before. So that was insightful, I would say.
Wow. It's such a like for anyone who hasn't come across this stuff, look up the arising and passing, because to me at least, it just sounds such a classic, arising and passing. And it's really funny listening to people describing like this kind of experience. They're not, there's so many different types of them, you know. But every time I hear them, I'm just like, oh yeah. Like arising and passing. There was a great interview I listened to recently with some Zen teacher, British guy who lives in New Mexico or something now. And he got into the Zen tradition, which kind of, it has this kind of thing. They've got their own names for it in Zen. But they don't go into the sort of detail that someone like Daniel Ingram has, or maybe the old Theravadan Buddhists, you know. And it's so funny listening to the guy talking about his experiences like this. I think he had some before he'd got into any kind of meditation, you know. He was like just a teenager, just staring at, you know, a sunset. He was like 22 or something and sitting on a beach. He'd just finished his first book. He was very young, and he just like had this great sense of relief. Just relaxing. And then whilst looking at the light on the water, he just had this like everything just gone kind of, you know. The way he described it was like emptiness. The kind of, because he was using Zen language, basically, this thing that there is no solidity to any of it. And it just, and he's just like, yeah, and I had no way to explain it. And then, of course, he had a classic like Dark Night for a decade. Like the whole life fell apart, didn't know what was going on, trying to figure it out. Eventually, he finds some stability and he gets into Zen. And he's like, oh, they understand me. When I talk to people in this tradition about that stuff, they go, oh, yeah, I know. Yeah. That's it. I love that. So, I love that there's some sort of framework that to think about these things in, as potentially anyway. I mean, because the experience you described there is exactly the same kind of thing I had on Goenka retreats a couple of times as well. It wasn't explicitly sexual in a particular one that I had in a meditation hall, but it was kind of the same thing. There's just the whole solidity dissolving, everything turning into like motes of energy rushing through the body. And I had another one that was kind of in a pre-dawn meditation in a cell.
Pre-dawn? You mean timeline.
Yeah, before breakfast and all that.
Sure.
And the spine, I just remember it being like constellations of stars in the darkness, just turning, and just like, what the flying fuck is this? And you step out and the entire world is different. So I'll shut up. What happened after that?
I think the more because these experiences like that I had no references for in a way before the experience, but I think I don't know whether anyone's done any studies on how common they are, but I feel like they're pretty common. Like the more I kind of share about it, and then like coming across you and just meeting other people who've had similar experiences, I think it can be one of those, like, what do they call it? Like conspiracies of silence, right? Where it's such a personal, intimate, intense experience that few people want to kind of speak about it openly. That everyone thinks, oh no, that's only happened to me, or like it's such a rare thing. And so it's cool that it's just having this conversation now, and then it'll be kind of also shared publicly. I think it just, especially as meditation becomes, it has been becoming so popular in the West. Just kind of globally, really. So after that experience, it kind of basically lasted till the end of the retreat. Not as intense as that first hour, but just very blissful still. And I sort of, so I went back home, and then basically I signed up again. So that classic sort of craving for
I'll do that again
to continue. And they actually said, no, you can't sit back-to-back courses. So I said, well, how can I get back to that retreat center? And they said, well, you can serve. So I did. So I went back. I think they have a course every 10 days, basically, or maybe it's like 5 days. So within like a week, I was basically back at that same retreat center. But this time I was volunteering. And actually, I mean, those 10 days, because you have, 9 days was kind of volunteering, and then they gave you 1 day to just sit. And then still, even on that 1 day, it was still very, I just remembered going into there's just, so many of these weird experiences that happen. But I remembered walking into the dining hall, and I could just feel like my, the middle of my forehead just tingling, like buzzing like crazy. And like lights just looked, I don't know, just like really like halographic. I don't even know if that's a word, right? But like people and things just had this sort of like aura about them. Right? I don't know if I was actually seeing auras, but it just felt like that. And I could just feel this like zinging in the middle of my forehead, like a sort of a pleasurable zinging, but it's just bizarre, but very interesting.
Wild stuff.
yeah, so then after that, I basically went to the retreats quite often. Maybe I was doing one every 3 or 4 months. On my second full course, yeah, at that point it was kind of like I felt, well, I wouldn't say it was a crash, but I definitely didn't get that same peak experience that I had before on that first retreat. And yeah, I don't know whether, because I definitely had a good year where I was trying to chase that feeling again.
Yeah.
And it never came back.
Yeah.
But in some ways, after I started to drop that chasing,
Yeah.
I almost feel like it's something that feels quite accessible. Yeah, like maybe within like the last 2 years. So that first experience was maybe a good seven years ago now.
Yeah.
And so within the last 2 years, I feel like I've kind of stopped chasing that experience, but as a result, that experience is kind of a bit more common in a way. I don't know if that sort of makes sense. It's this sort of weird, very Zen, I guess, right? It's like you don't chase it, and so it'll come to you.
Yeah, there it is. Yeah.
But it makes sense.
Yeah.
Like experientially, it makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. It's wild. And when did you come across the sort of Daniel Ingram interpretation of this stuff?
I've not actually read his book.
Right.
I've read maybe the first 2 chapters, I think.
Right. Okay.
And I've read a few like Dharma Overground forum posts.
Yeah.
But but his work, I like, you mentioned him when we first talked.
Yeah.
I have like one other friend who was quite interested in his work. So, I've heard him quite a bit, but I've never actually sort of studied him in depth.
So in that time frame then, did you have any other way to sort of understand what had happened that first retreat and
so the first things I came across was those Daoist things, but that was kind of a bit sparse still, the knowledge around that. And then eventually I came across this Tibetan Buddhist translator, Allan Wallace, and he's I would say he's my main sort of teacher nowadays. And he's got a book called the Attention Revolution, and he talks a lot about the shamatha practices, and from my understanding, so they're like these 9 stages to shamatha, and I think they correspond with the 18 stages of insight of the arising and passing or something like that. So the first 9 correspond to the shamatha stages that Allan Wallace is talking about. So that was quite a good that was quite a good framework for me for a while, and still is in a way.
Do they correspond to Jhanic states at all? Is it that sort of thing?
Sort of. He's got quite a probably within like, especially within like Dharma Overground, I think he's got quite, they might even call him like an extremist. Right. Like in terms of how he might assess like the jhana states and things.
He's one of those that you've got to be up 6 nights and straight and
essentially, so his like he'll say like, okay, if you're in like the 4th jhana, it was like 2 weeks you don't have to breathe for 2 weeks, basically, right? And and I'm pretty sure like, and he, it's not his opinion, like these are actually what he's kind of, I guess, like finding from the text.
That's what those particular texts say.
But some people are like, well, that's obviously impossible or whatever, right? They have these reactions to that, which and I don't know, I really don't know. I think one of the things that I find quite interesting about, say, like for example, Tibetan Buddhism is, like a few weeks ago there was I can't remember his name, but some lama who died, and he hung out for like 3 weeks or something in what they call tukdam. Where he's dead, clinically dead, but his body doesn't decompose for a good, it was like 3 weeks, and like his skin, they said, was like still warm to the touch. He kind of felt like he was still alive. There was still some presence about him. And what I find super interesting is that the Dalai Lama is really open to working with people like Richard Davison to actually study these phenomena scientifically.
Yeah.
And because it's so sort of obvious, you know, like, okay, he's like clinically dead. We can like show that with these numbers, like, okay, you know, there isn't a pulse or whatever. There's no whatever. But yet he's still displaying these other signs. And so like that I find really interesting. And then when, you know, if that's possible, then okay, maybe 2 weeks not breathing, maybe that's possible, right? It's not like that sort of far-fetchedness becomes a bit less far-fetched.
Yeah. It's interesting so I read the Lee Brasington book.
Oh yeah,
on jhanas.
I've heard that name. Yeah.
For anyone listening who doesn't know what the hell we're talking about, jhanas are like meditation states, concentration states. English language is not very good at translating those sort of words. That's a rough approximation. And Brasington's got this sort of take on it that actually, no, look, the original, you know, the Theravada, the suttas say that it's this thing, and then later on this other thing was invented that was called jhana.
Right.
In the later texts, basically. And the later texts, you might as well be Superman and, you know, walk through mountains and stuff. It's kind of like, you know, by the second jhana, you can levitate, move houses with your thoughts. And, you know, it's kind of, they're quite extreme. Yeah. Whereas the Theravadan ones are like just quite sort of practical in his opinion. Sort of most people can achieve something of them in a 10-day retreat. And also interesting little thing in the old suttas, whenever they say meditate, they say let's jhana, basically.
Right, let's jhana.
It's like jhana yana or something, which means, you know, it's the verb of jhana. Yeah. And that's what Buddha says, okay, bhikkhus, let's do this now.
Let's jhana. I like that.
Yeah.
Hey, let's jhana.
yeah, funny. Because that's my thing still at the moment. That's what I'm exploring, basically, at a really low level, just in my daily practice.
Yeah.
Okay, so you got to tell us about this guy. I forget his name now. Your
Allan Wallace.
Allan Wallace. Yeah. How'd you meet him, and what's that all about?
Oh, how did I meet him? I think it was a Buddhist Geeks podcast.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. He had a podcast called PhD in Contemplative Science.
Okay.
And I really like the sound of that.
Yeah.
Because it was like, it was like sort of okay. He was kind of equivalent. He was equating. So he was saying, in the West, people are trying to bring that monastic model to the West. You know, the monastic model that's kind of deeply historical in the East and has a lot of culture behind it.
Yeah.
And trying to take that and just like sort of drop it in the West. So you have like you have these like white guys basically ordaining as monks, and maybe it can work. But he was saying what might be a better fit is if we take what we have in the West, which is the sort of university system. So you've got this undergraduate, master's, PhD, and if you take that and you apply it, but to contemplative science, so so a monastic sort of training in the East is kind of like that. It's like doing a really rigorous academic, but also sort of with that sitting practice as well included with it. And so he was saying, what if we use that as a way to train contemplatives, basically, which I really liked. And part of something like that, where you might do an undergraduate in meditation or master's in meditation and PhD in meditation, would involve a lot of sitting practice, but then maybe you might also have a lot of self-report or kind of writing down your experience, and then trying to maybe the word he used was intersubjective corroboration. So you would have other people engaging in these contemplative PhDs, and you would basically say, I was doing this, and I was experiencing this, and then I might ask you, Bill, did you have that same experience when you did this, and what was the different conditions that affected that? And when you reach a certain level of practice, the attention does stabilize, and you can make these sort of consistent and reliable reports, basically.
Yeah.
That you could actually sort of start to collaborate with people and say, okay, yeah, actually, I think there's actually something here that we can go to regularly and consistently. And,
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that, that was kind of the vision he had for
Nice.
that sort of contemplative science. So that was where that was how I first found him. And then I liked his style. So I just ended up, he has all these podcasts online. And so I was listening to a bunch of his podcasts.
Yeah.
And then I looked up his itinerary, and he was going to be in Scotland within like 3 or 4 months. So
Right.
I booked a retreat with him, basically.
Yeah.
That was where I met him.
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah, up in Samye Ling.
Cool. And how did that like reframe your practice?
Well, so at that time, I had still been going to these Goenka retreats and, meditating a lot, basically. And I was also meditating a lot, on my own at home. But I felt like there was a bit of a ceiling in a way with the Goenka practice. Not the practice, but the sort of access to information and access to knowledge. I guess I was kind of wanting a bit more theory, maybe. And I think there were certain things. So like I also did like the 8-day Satipatthana retreat that Goenka offers, and there were just certain things that I was a bit confused by when, there was these 4 applications of mindfulness, the body, feeling, mind, and all phenomena, all dharmas. And Goenka he's always coming back to just the sensations, and he never talks about the mind aspect or the all phenomena aspect. And I just thought, okay, well, I guess maybe that's skillful because we're still very early on, or I wasn't sure whether he was ever going to come to that. So I was kind of seeking another teacher who could maybe start to explore that a bit more for me. At least theoretically, which Allan Wallace did. He actually spent, I think, 6 months with Goenka, practicing with him as well. So
that rings a bell. I read a book recently with another guy who kind of was there actually maybe a bit before. No, he practiced with Goenka when Goenka was still a student, basically. This guy Coleman, who was a spy. He was an American CIA agent in the Far East when he got into Buddhism and trying to sort of find some sort of path to peace. It's a good little story. And he practiced with Goenka in the early days. Did you hear? So we spoke to Daniel Ingram a couple months ago now. Did you get a chance to listen to that?
Not all of it, no.
Okay. There's a good little bit in there about Goenka, because the story that Ingram heard anyway was that in Goenka's practice, he was given a very particular thing. Was it Ubakin who taught him?
Yeah, Ubakin.
Yeah. He was given
Ubakin
had decided that this was the right sort of practice for him, and he was giving different one to each of his students.
Right.
And it worked for Goenka. He had great results from doing this sort of body scan stuff. So he's like, okay, that'll do. And that's where he's then gone on to
I see.
kind of teach for everyone.
Right.
Yeah.
That makes sense, yeah.
Yeah, it's a funny one, isn't it?
Yeah, and I don't think that's necessarily, because I think the Buddha does say, like, just something with mindfulness of breathing can bring you to arhatship, right? I think he says something like that.
Yeah.
So it's not to downplay the practice at all. It's just, I think for me, I was sort of wanting a bit more, I guess the big picture context.
Yeah.
Especially as, Buddhism was this kind of very new thing.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And then that, well, how did you get onto, so the another of the topics last time me and Liam spoke was that Liam had done a year long retreat.
No, not a year.
It wasn't a year.
It was 6 months.
6 months. Okay, done a 6-month retreat solo in some small town in Portugal.
Spain. Yeah.
Spain, right? Yeah.
Small village of like 50 people.
Small village. It's so hilarious. So how did you get onto that? What led you there?
So that was mainly influenced by Allan Wallace, I think, and the way he was presenting the teachings. He was, and that's also one of the reasons why people call him an extremist in a way, because he basically says like for something like the first jhana, if you even want any hope of achieving it, you have to really be in full-time practice, and you have to really be putting in like 12-hour days, 16-hour days practicing, because otherwise your mind is just not going to settle enough to actually achieve the full jhana, is what he would call it. You might have experiences of it, but to actually fully achieve it won't be possible unless you're in full-time retreat.
Yeah.
And I at that time I kind of really took it to heart, and I mean, that was only, I came out of retreat June 2019, so that was only about just over a year ago now. And I was like, I'm like 25 at that time, and I was like, what? Let me try, let me put in like, let's try 6 more, because before that I had done a 2-month retreat, and before that I had done a 2-week retreat, both of them solitaries. So I was kind of working my way upwards, and I thought, I might as well just give it a shot while I'm not married, I don't have kids, I've got this free time, and I'm, it just felt like the most opportune moment to give this a shot, is that whole, coming back to that whole direct experience thing. I can kind of try to follow all these endless debates on Dharma Overground, and people can say like, this is too much, or this is not enough, or this person says this, but that person says this, and I'm like, okay, well, I just got to try, I got to see for myself whether this is something that's possible or not. And so that was kind of the intention. It was kind of this deep sort of curiosity, and conditions aligning as well.
Yeah.
So like this cabin in Spain was offered to me basically, rent free. Yeah. And initially the woman said, well, maybe you can contribute to the electricity. Yeah. But then she basically said, no, I'll cover the electricity as well. Don't worry about it. Yeah. And so that's like, it just felt like, okay, these conditions are coming together. I would be a fool to not try and do this now. So that was why I kind of did it. It was in Burgos in Spain, which is like 3 hours north of Madrid. Yeah. I have some funny stories with that, but like, one is, so it's just this like small cabin in this village of like 50 people, mainly elderly people. Yeah. And they don't really speak English there. It's in the middle of, not really anywhere. And suddenly there's this young sort of Chinese kid who's come into their village. And he wants to spend 6 months in this cabin with this sort of vow of silence, right? And he's just going to meditate every day. And so like, so the first month I remember, nobody locks their doors in this village. So I also didn't lock my door. And the first month I begun this retreat. And I have, I had this like little piece of paper in Spanish saying like, I'm in silence. So, cause I would go for walks sometimes around the countryside. And if I bumped into someone, I would just kind of give them this note if they tried to speak to me, because like people are very friendly in these small towns. And I remember the first month, I'd be meditating, and occasionally someone would just like hear about me, because like they have like, so there's 50 people in the village, and they have like friends from the cities, and they come and visit for the weekend, and they're like, oh, hey, did you know that there's this new kid and like meditating, and he's silent, and and so like. occasionally I just get these visitors come through, and they would just open the door because it was unlocked.
Yeah.
And they come in, and I remember one like coming in, and he would do this the Anjali to me, and he said like Namaste, and then just walk out and leave. There'd just be these things that would happen that you just kind of realize, oh yeah, you're in Spain, you're doing something actually very out of the ordinary.
Yeah.
But I enjoyed the intention. I guess it was quite fun.
Bonkers.
Yeah, I had these lovely 3 aunties who were like basically my neighbors.
Yeah.
And every week they would come by with like some tortilla or some warm soup or some food basically that they literally offered to me. And it was amazing actually. It was really a sweet gesture.
Wild. So how did that retreat go? I mean, where did you get to with it? What did it feel? That's quite a long time to meditate for.
Yeah. So the 3 practices that Allan teaches are so there's the mindfulness of breathing, very similar to the Goenka practices. But he also talks about 2 other practices. So one called settling the mind in its natural state. And that's kind of like, it's kind of more on the mind focus part. So it's you basically take the mind and the space of the mind as the object of meditation. And then the last practice is one he calls awareness of awareness, which for some people sounds quite abstract, I guess. But it's a very, very simple practice, that last one. And those were kind of the 3 practices I went in, mainly practicing. And then occasionally I would have, some of the, what Allan calls the 4 immeasurables. So the metta, the loving kindness, the compassion, empathetic joy, and sort of equanimity practices.
Yeah.
So I don't know whether I should go into each of those practices, but that kind of made up the bulk of my day, doing those practices. So I would have sort of individual sessions, because I'd already, this 6-month retreat was kind of like a continuation of my previous 2-month retreat, even though there was a gap in between. But like on that one, I had started with, I started with like, I think it was 21-minute sessions. And I just did as many 21-minute sessions as I could throughout the day. And then as my attention refined and improved, I would increase the session by, a few minutes each time. And so like with this 6-month one, I was, by the end of it, I was sitting 3-hour sessions, maybe sometimes 4-hour sessions. And just sort of continuing the practice. Essentially this, so shamatha that Allan talks about, which is equivalent to, so would be equivalent to this sort of more technical part, but equivalent to the access to the first jhana. So it wouldn't even be considered the first jhana according to him. And from what I understood, it's basically this, it's like falling asleep, but being completely aware without losing consciousness. So, when you fall asleep, you don't have any awareness of the room that you're in. That whole sort of this, what Buddhism calls this desire realm, essentially dissolves into what Allan translates as the substrate consciousness. And so that entire desire realm kind of collapses and dissolves into that substrate consciousness, and what you're left with is just this pure, just consciousness, basically. And then what the first jhana is what's the word for that they use? A form realm. So they call it a form realm. And then there are these the formless jhanas that they call, and that's in the formless realm. So there are these sort of, essentially sort of different realms that you can kind of, you in a way enter. And so that sort of dissolving the desire realm was kind of what the point of the shamatha was. And I, my understanding of that was you would kind of dissolve that desire realm And then at that point, you would then apply some of these Vipassana practices to really cut through some of these sort of core, what they might call like core afflictions or core obscurations, of like this sort of, that ignorance that Buddha says is the cause of suffering. And so it's pretty deep work. And some of it might sound a bit weird, but I think from all of that meditating, I feel like he's not chatting shit, what Allan is kind of saying. I think these realms are, maybe realm is not the best word for it, but they're definitely, like I guess a dream, you could say, is a dream realm.
Yeah.
And so those things definitely exist. But here you have these sort of meditative states that are very similar to how you might access a dream.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's such a contrast to Brasington's impression of jhana. It's like, they're almost completely separate categories of thing altogether, the way that he talks about them. I mean, it's essentially like in that kind of the way that Brasington at least translates the original Theravadan jhanas. First jhana is basically kind of like, when someone first is able to meditate, basically, and they're like, oh wow, I can stay concentrated, and I'm not completely just tripping out on thinking about my job and life and whatever. I can actually meditate, and I'm concentrating on one thing.
Yeah.
For extended periods. It's first jhana. It's very, very basic in comparison to this other. I forget what they call them, but the Tibetan interpretation or whatever. This sort of later interpretation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, it wasn't like because like on a practical level, those kinds of descriptions were they weren't really useful for my own everyday practice. And so, Allan has like these earlier stages before the shamatha, so the 9 stages to shamatha, where he describes similar things about, on stage 2, this is, you can have your attention on your object for a minute, but then the attention goes away.
Okay, yeah.
So it is very practical at that level.
Right.
They just maybe use different names for the same thing, basically.
Yeah, exactly. It's, thousands of years of people misinterpreting things in books and making up new things and coining new terms. It's a wild old history. I mean, I don't know what it is that I'm currently going through in meditations, but what I've been doing is a lot of kind of using a light to focus, kind of
an external light.
Yeah. So kind of following Ingram's Vipassana guidelines, sort of thing. So I focus on a light whilst counting, say, 8 breath cycles, just as they come, and then I'll close my eyes and do the same whilst looking at the after image. And usually within half an hour of that, there's a shift into a different state of consciousness, and I don't know what you'd call it, but it's definitely different. It's it's not at all it reminds me mostly of things that would happen fairly deep in a retreat. And I don't know what it is. It might be first or second jhana in the Brasington this description of them, and then there's sort of shifts happen after that into other stages, and each one it feels like there's less. I'm doing less. It's like you're able to let go of more subroutines. If your brain was a computer doing routines, it's like you can just let some of them go and go, that's a relief.
Right, yeah.
So that's kind of my daily practice on a good day recently. And it feels like a subset of stuff that I've been through on Goenka retreats, and I'm just I keep on exploring it because it's really interesting getting some control over it and learning to switch between these different states, whatever they are. That they do look like Brasington's description of first, second, third, fourth jhana in his book. That the way he describes them, there's these things that happen, and by the time you get to fourth in that book, it's like there's almost nothing going on mentally.
Yeah.
Like there's no inner voice, barely any inner voice, and all the senses kind of merge a little bit in a really interesting way. I don't know if you've had anything similar where it's kind of like sound suddenly gets like really intense, but also it kind of feels like a kind of it's a mix with vision and feeling as well, and that kind of thing. It's like it's almost synesthetic.
Yeah.
Have you experienced similar things?
I don't know so much about synesthesia. Is that what the word is?
Yeah.
But for sure with with that sort of super quiet mind and thoughts, you know, like I get these experiences quite frequently where you can have like the thoughts, like where you might just get like a half thought, but it doesn't fully become a thought, but it just vanishes before it even takes form, right? And there's just this real quietness, like a big blue sky, essentially.
Yeah.
You know, very spacious.
I remember someone describing it like it's like thoughts. You sort of see the substrate.
Right.
It's like you're kind of surfing above this ocean where they come from. And some of them sort of, you know, they sort of pop up like flying fish for a half second and then, you know, but they didn't really fully form. Yeah. And they definitely didn't take over your whole fucking mind like they can when you're not in that state, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a rare and wonderful thing. I mean, I question my attachment to meditation as well. And I'm trying to understand like how it fits into the rest of my life a bit better as well, because I really value it. I get so much out of it. I lose so much stress every time I sit. But I'm also wary of getting so attached to it as well. Do you know what I mean? Because it's like there's so much more to life as well than, you know, pretend to be a fucking monk or something.
Right.
Like,
yeah.
We're here for such a short time as humans. Like, what are we? You know, what are the best things we can do? It's like that kind of question. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Have you? I think I asked when we were in a pub, but have you come across like Shinzen Young's work?
Oh yeah.
He's got this lovely phrase on maximum meditation mileage or something like that. MMM he calls it, right?
Yeah.
Where it's like, and I think, you know, that is the point of the meditation, right? It's not like the sitting still doing nothing.
Yeah.
It's kind of to help with the mindfulness 24/7.
Yeah.
Right? So that when you are just living your normal life, you can just have that extra sort of refined attention. And I think one thing Shinzen talks about is this, you know, like with mindfulness, you can't, you might not necessarily like live longer, but each moment, your sort of ability to experience each moment becomes much more, right? Whereas in the past, before meditation, you might have gone like an hour just lost in thought or, you know, completely distracted by something. And in a way, that's kind of this sort of zombie state, right? Where you're not necessarily living.
Yeah.
But then when you bring this meditative state to everything, then it's like you can 10 times your lifespan without actually living longer, right? Because you just have more experience per minute, so to speak, right?
Yeah, that's a nice way to look at it as well. I mean, I guess what I'm struggling with a bit is how, how to sort things out in lots of areas of my life as well. You know, relationships and my marriage, and you know what I mean. Like, there's lots of things there that I know that just meditation is not the answer for. Do you know what I mean? There's more work that I have to do in these different aspects. I heard someone else talking about it as how, you know, we've got this tradition now from Buddhism, this Buddhist thing of waking up, and then there's these other things that say have come out of perhaps 20th century psychology of like what did he call it? It was growing up, I think, and then cleaning up was another one. And that we can, you could become like, quotes, fully enlightened through some meditative tradition, but then how all these kind of enlightened masters came over from India and Tibet and what have you to the West and just kind of made an incredible mess of their lives and other people's lives because they hadn't done the growing up and the cleaning up stuff.
Right.
They'd just done the waking up, and that's enough to make you feel invincible and omniscient and all the other good stuff. But actually, they caused just a wake of chaos and exploitation, and all kinds of kind of bad stuff happened around them too.
Yeah, is that similar to that term, spiritual bypassing, or?
Probably, I'm not sure what that is.
Yeah, where you kind of use spirituality as a way to bypass certain flaws in your, or maybe not flaws is the right word, but unaddressed issues, that you don't maybe want to look at, and you use spirituality as a way to cover that up.
Yeah. I mean, that's such a classic. I think that's a slightly different thing in that it's like just kind of what most religions do all the time.
Right.
Let's pray to whoever and, solve all our problems. And meanwhile, you just carry on with your life as usual. But, I think it's definitely a thing that it's I don't know, it's something that I'm thinking about a lot anyway in relation to meditation, and perhaps it's something that these traditions need to address as they go global,
right?
And interact with different societies around the world and become something else. Because I think that's what's happening now with Buddhism. People talk about a fourth turning,
right?
Which it probably will look like in retrospect, whatever happens over the next century or so, if we're not all, scrabbling for canned food in a radioactive wasteland and can actually look back on this period, it probably is something like that. Because it went through, I don't know the details of all those, but 3 major turnings as it went from different countries and time periods.
Yeah.
It's doing that now, like going global, I guess.
Yeah. That's I mean, that kind of makes it quite turbulent sort of times, but also very exciting in a way.
Yeah, totally. I mean, there's a cool film I've been watching. It's called A Year of Living Mindfully.
Is that with that? It's a woman, right?
Yeah.
She does clinical studies on herself. And self-experiments.
Yeah. I haven't finished watching it yet, but link in the show notes, folks. That's really good and quite inspiring on the like, because it's clear just on a sort of basic level, there are so many benefits to taking 20 minutes out of your day to contemplate your navel, basically, and just like not do more stuff. To stop doing for a minute and remember that, this life, this body, this mind, all this thing here that you experience. And I mean, just even on a basic level, if more people did that, I think it would improve things. I don't know how much it would improve things, but I like to think more than a bit, more. I don't know. It's a really interesting question. If everyone did 20 minutes of meditation a day, would the world be a better place? Probably would.
I think so, yeah.
I don't know how much by. I've heard people be very dismissive of that type of meditation, but I actually think there's something in that. I mean...
Yeah, I mean, there's that nice quote now from, was it Blaise Pascal or something?
Oh, yeah.
He says something like, all of man's problems comes from his inability to sit still in an empty room or something like that. Right?
Yeah. Sit quietly in an empty room.
Yeah. And I mean, I think there is, there's definitely something about probably a lot of the suffering that we experience, or the problems that we, the problems are actually sort of things that we perceive as problems, right? And they're quite sort of, for a large part, imaginary in a way, and if we can just have that time to sit still and just sit with it, that imagination can actually dissolve without necessarily doing anything in the sort of external world to try to resolve it. Not everything probably, but I think a lot of things could just be sort of let go of in a way, if we can.
I feel like it would shift culture a bit too, because if everyone was doing that, then it would be like there would be more people thinking about, oh well, where does this lead to, and what, how can I go deeper with it, and what will happen if I do. And if 10% of the human race was thinking along those lines, that would be a much bigger cultural shift than just the everyone doing 20 minutes every day kind of thing, which I don't know, I hear people be very dismissive of that kind, the mindfulness explosion. Everyone's like doing, headspace.
Right.
20 minutes a day and it's going to change the world, man, and like, yeah. I kind of hope it does, I think it would be great if it just like everyone was doing that, and they might drink a little less and, maybe punch their wife less and, their kids and who knows? It can, even these short like MBSR mindfulness-based stress reduction courses do apparently change lives. There was one of the quotes in the movie Living Mindfully, that it was like 5 times more effective than standard treatment for certain things, like trying to give up smoking and stuff like that. There's like crazy stuff comes out of it. Even some insurance company now is it was like they're taking it on as a recommendation for people with high blood pressure. It was something like that, because the science supports it well enough now that if you do this thing, it will probably help with your blood pressure enough that an insurance company is taking notice. Right? There's
I mean, those kinds of things are exciting, for sure. I spent like about a year teaching mindfulness to secondary school kids.
Oh, amazing.
Actually.
We did speak about this briefly,
and I mean, by and large, most of the kids enjoyed it and definitely got something out of it. Whether it's like, they were just like simple observations that they might realize. Like, for example, when they were using their phones, they stopped breathing. Just insights like that can actually be super helpful, or like many of them talked about having like anxiety, and so they can't sleep at night. And so now they might just put on like some headspace for like 10 minutes just before they go to bed, and that helps them fall asleep. And I mean, for that kid, that's quite a big deal. It's amazing, and then if you see that kind of spread out, if like mindfulness becomes this, part of the national curriculum or something like that, that has, for sure, that has an impact, I think.
Yeah. At this point, we went off on a bit of a detour, but I thought I'd leave you with the last few minutes because it might amuse you.
It's like, I guess coming back to sort of Buddhism, right? It's like the nature of things. It's like we will face these existential threats, right? Whether it's like a comet coming to whack us, or other, just other massive events. And it just kind of feels like that's what life is almost about, right? Like on a sort of big scale.
Yeah.
Even the earth is impermanent. And civilization is impermanent. And
I like to try and take a long view on these things. There's a nice little thing I learned recently about like deep history, prehistoric history, is that you get very little evidence in the fossil record. So for every 1,000 years or so, you get roughly one fossil.
Okay. Wow, I didn't know that. That's quite a few.
Which means that for human civilization, we might find 10 fossils. It's 10,000 years roughly. So if we blow ourselves up tomorrow, and like our future like cockroach overlords digging around doing some archaeology, they might find 10 fossils in this entire period, and might not actually know that there was ever a civilization, that we built cities and went to the moon.
Yeah. Well, have you? That's a really interesting you say. I didn't know that about the fossil, like one fossil for every 1,000 years. But have you heard of like Graham Hancock? I've not read much of him, but
no,
he talks a lot.
Bell, but what? Yeah,
he talks a lot about like ancient civilizations.
Oh yeah,
of like like basically human beings who are like much more advanced than we are today.
Okay.
And it's like, well, okay, if that, what you just said there, I was like, well, wow, maybe we just haven't found them because there's so few, right?
Yeah.
Maybe they were more advanced than us.
It's wild. I think it's quite unlikely that particular story, but I do like the idea that dinosaurs probably, built cities, rockets, went to the moon, then wiped each other out in a nuclear war or something.
Right. Yeah.
Because actually, it's quite possible, and we wouldn't know.
Right.
And in fact, like, there's so much time back there that it could have happened a few times.
Right.
With different dinosaur civilizations.
I like that. We should title this podcast Dinosaur Civilizations.
So it's possible that one day we'll find, a dinosaur flag on the moon. And not only that, but we might find 3 of them.
Right.
From different eras.
Yeah.
Still there.
Yeah.
And that's probably a good place to look too, because it's less likely to have been demolished by the sands of time.
Right.
I'm not sure on that, but I'd love to.
I have no idea.
If anyone listening in knows how often the lunar surface gets wiped out by comets or whatever, then let us know in the comments. I haven't looked it up yet. But I just love the idea of the dinosaur flag, like a claw on it or something. Oh, God. Yeah.
Yeah, I could get behind that.
I think that's probably a good place to leave it. And
cool, yeah, no, it's been delightful.
We covered so much.
Yeah, I think so.
Oh, my God.
Cool.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. That
Such a pleasure, as ever.
Yeah, that was very interesting.
Awesome. Slightly awkward at times. Haven't done this before much, as you can tell. Thanks for listening to this episode of Awakin podcast. We hope you enjoyed. Check out the show notes, listen to more episodes, and find our socials at our site, awake-in.com. We'd love to hear your feedback, so do please get in touch.